Oh, I can't wait for this one. 5 bets in 5 minutes. First and foremost, I know you're looking at the video thinking, wait a second, this is much longer than 5 minutes. We've got a bunch of other stuff we're going to talk about here, but we're going to dive into it. We'll start the clock momentarily. I'll give you 5 plays, week 4, NFL. Nothing too crazy this week, and we did fine last week, but only because we were up last week, but only because thanks to Saquon Barkley on Monday Night Football, mind you. But I think this is week 4 is the last real week in the start of the season where you can take advantage of some early trends. You can take advantage of coaching, especially over much worse coaching, and health matters so much on the offensive line. So as we do, we ask you to hit the thumbs up button to subscribe here. Even give you a little taste, wet your beak, right, with the first play. So you take a look at that. And then from there, we're going to start the clock, and we're going to go 5 and 5. But here's the thing. Beyond just hitting the thumbs up button, beyond just subscribing, take advantage of some stuff we have below for you. This awesome bet, really ability here at DraftKings to bet and build a bankroll is what I was trying to say. So we've got a lot of things we're going to tell you about. My goodness. Hopefully I can talk once we start the clock. 5 bets, 5 minutes. Let's do it. Not waste any more time. We will open up with Green Bay here. And this game now, I can't believe it, but this game is dropped to 10 somehow. If you look at Brian Hoyer, he is atrocious. 8 games since 2017. He's lost them all. And if you look at the last 2 games, he threw for 130 yards, 204 before that, with a total TD to pick ratio of 1 to 4. Pardon me. I don't even want to give him an extra touchdown. He's not good. They're going to hand the football off every single play. I don't care what issues Green Bay has. You at least have a guy on the staff in Joe Barry who has played against New England twice, one of them in the Super Bowl, holding them to just 13 points, right? First game we've seen now, and it's hard to think that the Packers don't blow New England out at home, and that's where I really would love to begin here, is just taking advantage of that. Second play, this is easy. Rams on the road. They're going to win straight up. Monday Night Football. I'm going to make you wait with your second pick here. Monday Night Football. Doesn't make much sense, right? You've got San Francisco all of a sudden is looking good, looking sharp. Jimmy G is in the house. Oh, wait, Matthew Stafford. He's never won in San Francisco. And you look at the history, 4 touchdowns, 4 picks in the 2 games that he's played there. And he won a playoff game against San Fran. But come on, folks. Come on, folks. Trent Williams is out. Their most important offensive lineman, arguably one of their most outside of Debo important players on the team, is out. Have you seen the Rams' defensive front? Are you familiar with who they boast out there to rush the quarterback? I don't care who they lost. It's how fast they can get there. Yeah, not having Trent Williams, I'm sorry. I don't want any part of this by any means. We move on. The Chiefs, money line. Who cares about this 1 point here? We don't need it. It's not even worth it for 10 extra points of juice. You've got a lot of guys here who understand Tampa Bay and Tom Brady. A lot of guys who coached against Tom Brady, starting with Andy Reid multiple times over, including the Super Bowl. And if you look at what's happened, Andy Reid in 2004, they lose. Then the following game, they meet, or the following time they meet 3 years later, Reid covers the spread as a 25-point underdog. In 2015, Reid loses to the Patriots with Brady. They play 2 years later. He crushes New England. In 2018, same thing happens. They lose. Next season, Chiefs win. 2020, they lose the Super Bowl to Brady's Bucks. They'll meet again, and it will stay the same. Chiefs win. Chiefs win. Chiefs win. All right, let's go to this one, and I'm going to lay 6.5 here for the Philadelphia Eagles. Wow, are you serious? We're going money line, money line, money line. Now you had to screw it all up, laying 6.5 with your Philadelphia Eagles. Hey, man, maybe it's just the fact that Chip Kelly's undefeated and something crazy's going on in my brain here. Doug Peterson's back in Philly. Doesn't matter. The Eagles right now are cooking, and it's not even with gas. It's kerosene. That offense is ridiculous. Jacksonville's defense is no joke. Their defensive line stopping the run is no joke. But with the addition now of A.J. Brown, it makes it so much harder to slow this passing game down. We've seen Devontae Smith. I told you after week 1 about Devontae Smith. Bang. Do that. Play that. But now you see how this passing game is an issue. You know who else is an issue? Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts is a major problem on the ground, and I'm not convinced at all that Jacksonville can stop him when it matters most. I'll take the Eagles by a touchdown. Oh, Ryan Tannehill. Over 1.5.
How's your dog doing, Rebecca?
So much better, but I mean, he's not allowed to do anything right now. Just lay on the couch. So I've been at least binge watching TV shows I've been needing to watch. But yeah.
Anything good?
Ted Lasso. Finished it
nice.
Week. Did it all in 1 week, but we're trying to make the most of a bad situation. It's so good.
Nice.
But yeah, 3 different meds to just keep him sleeping. So I feel horrible about it, but it's best alternative. Could be worse.
It is time to talk about week 4 of the NFL season and the top overall tournament plays for the slate across DraftKings and FanDuel. While you guys come in, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We are sponsored by Prize Picks today. And if you guys haven't signed up at Prize Picks yet, you can do so clicking on the link below. And when you go and sign up for the first time, make your first deposit, get up to a $100 bonus on that first deposit. We've got a lot of different tools over at Stokastic that will help you build out winning player prop cards on Prize Picks. We've got our odd shopper, which has all different projections for props and projected odds go over, under. And then, of course, our fantasy projections, which you can compare to some of the numbers over at Prize Picks. But week 4 of the NFL season, we're already 3 weeks down. Neil, starting with you, how's your week been?
It's been good. Have not enjoyed the last few showdown slates. The Thursday night slate, just once again, the chalk all hit. It's been rough. We need something to go a little bit weird in these showdown slates for it to work out, and that has not been happening. So that has been unfortunate. But overall, I cannot complain. I don't have a dog that I do have a dog. I don't have a dog that I had to take to the vet last week. I'm not missing a trip to Europe because of my dog being in some pain. So I guess all things considered, going pretty well over here.
I had a CSV error that screwed up all my lineups for Thursday. Not on DraftKings was fine. FanDuel, I totally fucked up my CSV for the Thursday night showdown. I don't even know what I did other than I'm looking whoa, none of my lineups look correct. And then I realized that just everything, I basically just uploaded random things by clicking a wrong button, which will happen from time to time. The good news about it that made me feel good about it after the fact was that it wouldn't have mattered because, like you said, there were so many dupes that came in first place that there was no chance I would have done well on that slate anyway. So at least I reasoned with myself, I screwed something up that I wasn't going to end up caring about anyway, because it would have been oh, cool, I would have come. First of all, it was a lineup I wouldn't have played that ended up coming in first place, first of all. And then second of all, even if I did, I would have lost money on the slate anyway. So I agree with you. Showdown. I have to not fuck up my CSVs, and that would help out a whole bunch. Rebecca, I know your dog's been a little bit under the weather. You've been watching Ted Lasso. Other than that, how's everything else going?
It's been going all right. I mean, like Neil said, I had to cancel a trip to Europe, and I was going to see the Packers play in London, so that would have been a highlight of the year. But all things considered, I can't complain. My dog is alive. We got him on meds. He's good. So can't complain here.
All right, so let's start talking about this weekend slate, and got week 4 of the season. As per usual, we're going to start at the quarterback spot. And one thing that kind of stands out to me while I'm looking at some of the ownership, which usually it's spread out, but we've also got some cheaper quarterbacks that are looking like they're going to be fairly popular across FanDuel and DraftKings today, and some cheaper ones that we just normally wouldn't expect to see. The one, Neil, that stands out the most to me, Marcus Mariota, projected for nearly 10% ownership on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Now, I get it. He offers good salary savings. There's a little bit of rushing upside. Are you surprised, though, to see how much ownership is going to Mariota, and what do you make of it?
Not really, just considering the matchup, considering his weapons. I kind of like it. So I talked about Mariota a bit with Laffy on Wednesday as a quarterback that I like. I think his ownership has come up a little bit since then. We also got the news that Myles Garrett is officially out for the game. Hope he's, recovering well. But for this week, that benefits Marcus Mariota going up against that Cleveland defense that just has not been great so far this year. They've been one of the worst defenses in the league. So yeah, I'm in on Marcus Mariota. I'll be stacking him with some Drake London. I'll be stacking him with some Kyle Pitts, probably even Cordarrelle Patterson. I'm going to throw into some of my stacks with Marcus Mariota, but I think I might even end up above the field on Marcus Mariota. The Browns are 21st in pass DVOA, 26th in rush DVOA, and now they are without Myles Garrett. So I like the spot.
Yeah, and he's not the only cheap quarterback that's picking up some ownership today, Sunday. I know some people are going to be watching this Sunday, so it'll feel like today then. But we've also got Derek Carr, somewhat popular, Geno Smith, Jared Goff, even with Amon-Ra St. Brown. So usually the most popular quarterbacks are some of the more expensive QBs. That's just not the case this weekend, where, sure, Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, they're getting their ownership for good reason. But Rebecca, when you look at these cheap quarterbacks that are popular, Mariota, Carr, Geno Smith, even Jared Goff, just a few of the most popular QB options on the slate. Do you like getting overweight to any of these quarterbacks, or would you just rather pivot and pay up at the position?
See, this week I'm like, I want to pay up. Usually I would be saying otherwise. I would probably be going for someone cheap the first few weeks. But this week, since there are more popular picks in that like 50, mid 50s, like 55 to 59, I don't know. I think it's a good week to pay up for like Josh Allen, just because then maybe less people will have him. And all green lights for me this week for Josh Allen. But I would be tempted to at least throw in one lineup with a cheap quarterback. So since I'm not doing like your guys' 150 lineups, I might just do like a couple, mostly with Josh Allen, and then one with a cheap quarterback this week.
Yeah, and then Neil, I want to ask you, or actually, I'll ask you one follow up on that, Rebecca. Do you have a preference amongst the cheap quarterbacks? If you had to roster one, which one you'd go to?
So when I was first looking, I was like, oh, Matt Ryan, no one's going to be taking him. Like that actually doesn't look that bad, because it's just, mid Matt, you know what I mean? Like he's going to get some points, but he's not going to disappoint. He's not going to boom, but he is so cheap at 56. Goff is always looking pretty good at 59. But yeah, I would just tend to want to go with whoever is not going to be the chalk for those cheap guys.
All right. And then, Neil, I'm going to ask you, because we just talked a little bit about those low-cost options. If you're paying up at quarterback, what are you going to do with the more popular players that we have at the position? Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen. These are the two QBs that we have projected for double-digit ownership on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So the only two popular, real expensive quarterbacks, and everybody else kind of looks like the field is going to be looking to save money at the position. What are you going to be doing with the chalky spend-up options in Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts?
Yeah, so I really like Josh Allen. I mean, you just look at the top stacks tool projected for 11.8% ownership. He's the Bills have the top stack 19.8% of the time. Unclear if Gabe Davis is going to play this week. I don't think he's been ruled out. Actually, I should double check that. We got some bad news on him.
He said he's going to play, for what it's worth.
He did say he's going to play. Okay, so I mean, obviously, if he does play, then you can stack Josh Allen with obviously Stephon Diggs. Gabe Davis is going to be an option if he's available, which he says he is. Isaiah McKenzie is another guy I think is always pretty viable. He gets enough opportunity that he can have those spike weeks. And then Dawson Knox hasn't really done it yet this year, but I think he's always in play. So I like Josh Allen in part because, even if he were getting a ton of ownership, I feel like he has so many options that he can go to that I think he makes for a nice play. And sometimes, mix and match in some of those lineups, maybe I'll have some Josh Allen without any Stephon Diggs. And that's just a little way to get different, because most people, if they're hand building, making a lineup with Josh Allen, they're going to go right to Stephon Diggs. And I think if you just go to some of those alternate options, you can make some nice lineups that are kind of sneaky.
Yeah, I think that definitely does make some sense. And yeah, Gabriel Davis looks like he is going to be playing. And he had that really big fantasy game week 1 of the season, gets hurt for week 2, then kind of a dud last week. So we'll see what ends up shaking out between him and Diggs. But I do expect that Diggs is going to be the predominant number one wide receiver there. And then Gabriel Davis, nice complimentary second receiver. And just because of how good Josh Allen is, I'm sure he'll have plenty of games where he goes off like he did last year in, what was it, the second week of the playoffs, where he had like 4 touchdown passes and nobody rostered him at all, which is, the reason he got all that hype coming into this year and for best ball and whatnot. But Rebecca, you said that this is a slate where you're primarily looking to spend up at quarterback. Is that going to be with Josh Allen? Is it going to be with Jalen Hurts, or is it with somebody else?
Definitely Josh Allen. I just feel like it's so safe. So if you're going to be entering anything high stakes, you can't go wrong with Josh Allen. I mean, even if it's not his best game, it's still not going to break your lineup at all. So yeah, definitely Josh Allen.
Yeah, Josh Allen. And I know this is a tournament show, but for sure, if people are watching and looking to build a cash game on, Josh Allen's probably going to be the guy to go to there, just because he does bring a lot of safety to the table, not only with his passing ability, but also because of what he gets done on the ground. Now, Neil, in terms of the low dollar quarterbacks and some of the ones that we're looking to save money on, are there any of them that you don't like the ownership going to them, where we have, just to reiterate some of the players, Mariota, Carr, Geno Smith, Jared Goff, all picking up 5% plus ownership? Do any of them not look like good plays relative to their current ownership projection?
Yeah, so Geno Smith is a guy that if he's at low ownership against the Lions, then I'm in. I would take those shots, even though he hasn't really shown much upside historically. I would take those shots, but he's getting at 7.8% projected ownership right now. So I'm probably not going to be there with the field at 7.8% ownership. If it were lower, as I said, I would be in, but I don't think I can get there with Geno Smith. And I didn't answer your question about Jalen Hurts earlier. I like Josh Allen a lot better than Jalen Hurts, even though he's slightly higher owned. I just feel like the matchup is better. The game has the chance to explode, whereas I don't think Jalen Hurts is in quite as good of a spot against a really good Jacksonville defense and a Jacksonville offense that isn't as good as the Ravens. So I think that, I prefer definitely Josh Allen over Jalen Hurts. And then I don't know if you were going to get here just as far as the high end guys, but obviously Lamar Jackson just looks incredible this week at 4.5% projected ownership. He's top stack 9.8% of the time. And you can assume probably with Lamar Jackson that some of that 4.5% ownership is going to be non-stacked. So you can get even lower ownership on a Ravens stack. So I really like Lamar Jackson this week as well.
I can't believe he was only 1% owned last week. I looked at the large field tournaments, I feel like an idiot for not playing more Lamar Jackson. Then, and then of course some of it ends up being results oriented because he goes off and he scores, 40 plus fantasy points for the second consecutive week. But I can't believe there wasn't more point chasing that went on last week. And he was somebody who, if I knew he was going to be 1% owned, I would have loved to play 1% on Lamar Jackson, build some Ravens stacks. And
I feel like that can be a trap for some of us as tournament players. We assume that other people are going to point chase. So he didn't really cross my mind because it was like, well, he was so good last week. Everybody's going to go there. And there were so many other great options. So I just, I wanted to go to Matthew Stafford and some of the other, and Patrick Mahomes and guys who were getting, 5% ownership, which was objectively too low. But I just went to those guys and sort of missed on Lamar. I had some Lamar Jackson stacks, but yeah, I would have jammed him in if I had realized he was going to be that low owned.
Yeah, I don't remember my exposure to Lamar Jackson last week. I know it wasn't enough though. That's one thing I'm positive of. But Rebecca, I'll ask you whether it's Lamar Jackson or any other quarterback that's currently not projected to pick up a whole bunch of ownership. Do any of them stand out to you as a potential contrarian option?
I guess Lamar Jackson. I don't know. It's tough for me because after seeing 2 big games in a row, it's like when you see a bunch of blacks in a row and you want to go red the next time. I'm like, no, it's not safe. But I could be so wrong and it could still be worth it. But just my gut tells me not to go the Lamar Jackson route. Just seeing like 2 40 plus games, I'm like, I don't know. So yeah, as far as like paying up, even if he is more low owned, and maybe it's one of those surprise where we think he's going to be low owned, and then everybody at the last minute throws in a ton more Lamar Jackson. I'm not sure, but it wouldn't be my choice this week.
And then Neil, I'll ask you, any quarterbacks that are a little more off the board, picking up low ownership that we haven't mentioned, do you think make for good players to build some stacks around, or just low owned, good value plays? Any other QBs we haven't mentioned that do stand out to you?
I think I'm going to be targeting this Carolina and Arizona game from both sides. I don't think Baker Mayfield is a great quarterback, but I also think he's in about the best matchup you can have against this Arizona defense. They've just been terrible against the pass. So if Carolina is passing the ball, I'm going to have some Baker Mayfield. I hope that Christian McCaffrey actually does play in this game. I'll have some stacks that have Baker Mayfield, and then I'll mix and match, and I'll have a lot of Christian McCaffrey along with Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore. I feel like they're all going to make sense in some Baker Mayfield stacks. But also the other side, I kind of like Kyler. We haven't predicted for 1.8% ownership on this slate against Carolina, and Carolina's defense has been fine. They've been pretty middling this year, but I feel like Kyler just always has that potential for a spike game, and we haven't really seen it yet. So I think that Kyler is going to be a guy that I'm going to be targeting in a matchup that I think could go off. Like this game could be a pretty high scoring game. It also could not. I think this is a matchup that could really easily go either way. It could be just a dud because Baker's not great, but I think it's a matchup I'm going to be targeting just because of the low ownership.
I do a bet on Baker Mayfield this week. I bet the over on his passing yards prop. So take that for what it's worth. The number was 202.5 at opens, of like an egregiously low passing number, but it was for a lot of the same reasons that you just laid out in terms of it's a good matchup for him. And also relative to other Panthers games, last I looked, the total was 44.5. I mean, that's like the equivalent of a team scoring 200 points in a basketball game for the Panthers being a 44-point game. So I do like the over a little bit there. And then if we're just talking about it from a DFS perspective, he's really cheap. People aren't playing him. Even if they get their asses kicked into the game, if they're down by a couple touchdowns in the fourth quarter, it wouldn't be that difficult for them to rack up some sort of passing yardage in garbage time to put up some sort of decent high score for DFS purposes. I don't know. I think the thing that's craziest about Baker Mayfield, I can't believe he was ever good at any point in his career. Like, he was legitimately good his rookie year, and he stinks now. But he's cheap. Nobody's playing him. It's a good passing environment, and he does look like he's one of the more positive leverage quarterbacks on the slate. So from that standpoint, I could get behind him. Any other talking points for you at quarterback, Rebecca, or are we good to move on to running back?
The last talking point, I would say, this is a nice price. Russell Wilson at 67. Okay, Russ has not been cooking lately, but everybody, I mean, it seems like everybody's doing well against Vegas. So I don't know. That would be something I would consider. I don't know if you guys even had him on your radars at all. I'm not sure, but just like, because he has to have a good game eventually. And now it kind of seems like things might be aligned. I don't know. That would be one more.
I like that call. So he's not somebody I've talked about at all this week, not somebody I have been really thinking about that much. But now that you bring him up, he does look pretty interesting. The Broncos 21.5 implied team total could obviously go well over that. The Raiders 23rd in pass DVOA. So I like that call out. And obviously, you can pair him with Sutton and Judy, and I like his pairing option as well. So that's a really good call out.
All right, let's move on to the running backs here. And for the first time this year, we've got a lot of value at running back, and something we knew was going to happen sooner rather than later. Eventually, guys were going to get hurt. We're going to see backups move into starting roles, and that's what we've got this week. Jamal Williams, he is probably going to be starting at running back for the Lions this week. DeAndre Swift not expected to play, and then David Montgomery not expected to play for the Bears. So Khalil Herbert, he is going to be stepping into a starting running back role. We haven't seen it much this year. Typically, we've been paying up for a lot of running backs, and running backs been hard to find value at this year. The running backs have largely sucked from a fantasy perspective, but we've got a couple of cheapies to go to here, Neil. Jamal Williams, Khalil Herbert. Do you like getting to the chalk value RBs?
Yeah, I'll be eating some of that chalk. I don't know to what extent I'll be eating the chalk, but I'm certainly going to be probably pretty close to the field just because the price is right on both of them. I don't love that the Bears have an 18.5 implied team total right now. That does not bode well for Khalil Herbert, but they can obviously exceed that. The Giants are 28th in terms of rush DVOA per Football Outsider. So just a great matchup for Khalil Herbert. And I think he's a really talented running back. So you mix in a talented running back getting a real opportunity against a bad rush defense. I think he's going to show up. So I do really like Khalil Herbert. And then Jamal Williams is just a guy who's always been fairly talented. He's not the best running back in the league, but he's a good enough running back going up against the Seahawks, who are 21st in terms of rush DVOA. The Lions have a 25.5 implied team total. So like that better. They're favored. I like both of these guys. I'll probably be pretty close to the field in both cases.
I really like Jamal Williams. I'm likely going to end up being well overweight to the field on him. And It's not just the fact that DeAndre Swift is out, but I think that he's going to have just a massive share in the backfield because we've seen it be a split between him and Swift. Although, like last week, even before Swift got banged up, Jamal Williams was playing more of the snaps. This could be somebody playing like the old Le'Veon Bell type role where he's on the field constantly, passing situations, running situations, goal line situations. So he's almost certainly going to end up being my most rostered player of the week, unless something crazy changes where he's projected to end up being, like crazy owned. But as of right now, he's popular, but nothing insane. We've got him projected for 17% ownership on FanDuel, 23% on DK. I'm totally cool with that. Jamal Williams is going to be my number one overall go-to guy this weekend. Rebecca, looking at the running back position for you, what do you make of Jamal Williams and Khalil Herbert, the two running backs that are stepping into starting roles?
So I haven't really thought much about Khalil Herbert, but Jamal Williams seems like a perfectly safe option. I hate taking anybody that's highly owned, but if they're not going to be the most expensive guy, and you know that they're going to be playing all those snaps, it just seems like some chalk that I'm willing to eat for sure. I looked at Najee Harris a little more. I would have to look back again at Khalil Herbert because I don't know, that one just like it never stood out to me at first pass, but I definitely will have Jamal Williams just because it just seems like perfectly safe.
Yeah, and I think points per dollar, he's the best overall play on the slate, at least for me. He rates out really well in our projection. So definitely, like I said before, he's going to be somebody I'm building my lineups around. Now, we talked about some of the value options, at least the more popular value options. Are there any good pivots you see if you want to get to somebody who's priced around Herbert and Jamal Williams, but is just expected to be lesser owned?
Yeah, so I think AJ Dillon at 6,000 is going to interest me. I'm going to be interested in both Packers running backs. AJ, I guess his ownership is up to 6.1%, so it has come up a little bit, but still 6,000 at 6.1% ownership. I feel like AJ Dillon always has that spike week potential in a matchup where the Packers are favored by 9 points or so. I think that AJ Dillon and Aaron Jones are going to both be really interesting to me. AJ Dillon being kind of in that same price range. Dameon Pierce is a guy you can play. He's looking a little bit over-owned in our tools, but again, that is a small sample size. He's just 5,600, and he seems to be coming into his own as the lead back in Houston. So at 6.4% ownership, I think I'm still willing to go there a bit. The matchup with the Chargers is middling. We've seen running backs have great games against the Chargers, so I think that he's got a shot, even with the 19.75 implied total. Not the best matchup in the world, but I think Dameon Pierce has been pretty talented so far. He seems to be pretty good. So I think I'm willing to go to Dameon Pierce. Seeing if there are any other. Kareem Hunt is only projected 2.5% ownership. That kind of interests me. I kind of like whenever Kareem Hunt is low owned, and I get it. It's a split backfield, and Nick Chubb has been getting the lion's share, but 2.5% ownership. We have him in the optimal lineup 4.3% of the time. So I'm going to have some interest in Kareem Hunt as well. Rashad Penny's ownership has come up a lot. That's kind of a bummer. I really liked him at low ownership. I'm not going to like him quite as much now that he's in double digits. Those are a few that just jump out at me looking through the page right now. And then we've talked about, I kind of like Ramondre Stevenson. He may be taking over. I'm not confident that Ramondre Stevenson is taking over that Patriots backfield. It's not a great spot where they're only projected for like 15 points, their implied team total. I want to see if that's updated, if that's still true. They were just expected to get thrashed by the Packers. Yeah, 15.5 implied team total against the Packers. But the Packers have the 32nd ranked rush defense in terms of DVOA. So great spot in terms of that. And if he is taking over the backfield, then he's just too cheap, even when they have such a low implied total. But with that said, I might even still take a few shots at Damien Harris just because I can't help myself. I'm not totally sure that it's Ramondre Stevenson's backfield, and I think Damien Harris could still be involved. So I like Ramondre Stevenson better. I'll still probably take some shots on Damien Harris.
Yeah, of the guys you mentioned there, I'm going to agree with you on Dameon Pierce, especially because, week one, it was so weird where, Pierce was the guy who was getting hyped coming into the season, both in terms of year-long leagues, best ball leagues. And I think week one, he was maybe like around 10-ish% owned on DraftKings and FanDuel. But then ultimately, he just didn't play that much. Rex Burkhead was the guy for them in both the passing game and the running game. And then what happens week two? Burkhead barely plays. It's all Dameon Pierce. And it kind of seems like the way it's trending. for the rest of the season. So I don't know why the hell it was that Rex Burkhead was doing everything for them in week 1, but it looks like it was an aberration that isn't going to continue. And I do think Pierce is going to be probably one of the more used running backs over the course of the season, as long as his health holds up okay. Rebecca, I want to ask you about the spend up options at the position, where we've got a lot of good running backs on this slate. Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley. Nick Chubb has been probably the best just running back in the league this year. Of the pay up options, Rebecca, which one do you gravitate towards the most?
Well, so this is a position I'm not keen on paying up for, obviously, just because of the letdown. But if I were, I would probably go Jonathan Taylor because we're waiting for that game. You know what I mean? Like, after his last 2 performances, you just know a big one's coming. So I would pay up for him on a small amount of my lineups. Otherwise, I'm sticking around the 6,000 range just because there's so many options around there. And even if you were going to go like dirt cheap, you could go Breece Hall and you still might get more points than some of these expensive guys. But if I'm paying up, I'm Jonathan Taylor just because I'm waiting for that big game and I want to be the one who has him when that happens. But yeah, not so many other pay up options there for me. And even like someone like Aaron Jones at 7,500, that's not bad, but I would be more leaning towards Dylan. I think that he's a little bit better of an option just because of his price and seeing where the Packers are at right now. But yeah, so I don't know if there's anybody else who's really caught my eye. I don't know if you guys agree with that or not, but for pay up wise.
Yeah, so for me, I'm just going back to Derrick Henry at low ownership. And Neil, I don't know if anybody has gotten more upset about a well-reasoned take last week than Derrick Henry. We had the one guy was swearing to never watch us again because we like Derrick Henry as a play. And he was convinced that the Titans had no chance of playing competitive game against the Raiders last weekend. And you know what I really liked about Derrick Henry last week? He came into week 3 only having 1 target in the passing game the entire season. He was targeted 6 times last week. So he got 20 carries, also had the 6 targets. Obviously, the goal line touches are always going to be Derrick Henry. That's a massive workload. I don't understand this Derrick Henry low ownership in general, or the fact that sportsbooks opened him up with an over-under rushing prop of 70.5 this week. I get that a lot of people are saying like, oh, he was hurt last year. Maybe he's a little bit over the hill, which, I mean, there's always that possibility. He's only averaging 3.6 yards per carry, but go back to a year ago where he was the number 1 fantasy running back prior to getting hurt. He wasn't all that efficient. He was only averaging 4.3 yards per carry. It just doesn't matter when your team is giving you 25 to 30 touches per game. So Derrick Henry, I think his workload is as safe as any running back in the league. And of the pay up options, he's the least popular once again. I'm going to be going back to Derrick Henry. Are you doing that, Neil, or is there somebody else you like?
Yeah, so I can't tell you how many times I've said I'm just going to fade Derrick Henry. You know, he's too expensive. He's in a bad matchup. I'm just not going to bother playing him. And then he scores 3 touchdowns and kills me. So I'm not going to make that mistake. I'm going to have some Derrick Henry. I don't think I'm going to be jamming him in though. I'm not going to be like well above the field. He's not expected to get much ownership. It is a tough matchup with the Colts, second in terms of rush DVOA. So I don't love the matchup. 19.75 implied team total. Don't love that. But as you say, the volume is there. He's Derrick Henry. And even in bad matchups, you know, if there's a pass interference call, they get the ball on the 1 yard line, where are they going? They're probably going to Derrick Henry. I guess they went to Jeff Swaim last week once, and they actually ran it in with Ryan Tannehill too. So we didn't get quite the spike week that we could have had from Derrick Henry, but I mean, more likely than not, they're going to go to Derrick Henry when they have the ball inside the 5 yard line. So yeah, Derrick Henry is one of those guys that even when it's a bad matchup, he can always go off. So yeah, I'm going to have some Derrick Henry. It's not a full fade for me, but at 5.6% projected ownership, I don't see myself really getting far above the field on Derrick Henry. And because I do kind of like some of these other options a little bit better. You brought up Nick Chubb. I think Nick Chubb looks fantastic. I said before that I like man, what's his name? Kareem Hunt this week. I was misreading this. Kareem Hunt, I really like at 6,000, but I like Nick Chubb for the same reason. He is more expensive, but he is typically the bell cow, and it's just a great matchup with the Falcons. So I really like Nick Chubb as a pay up option. And then, you know, Saquon Barkley I'll have mixed in there. He's coming in at high ownership, but he deserves the ownership. He's been crushing it. If Christian McCaffrey plays, I told you how much I like that game, that Carolina-Arizona game. Christian McCaffrey will definitely be in the mix for me. And then, yeah, Jonathan Taylor. It's a pretty solid matchup for Jonathan Taylor against the 20th rush defense in the league in terms of DVOA in the Titans. So there are some interesting pay up options this week. I'll have some. I have a little bit of interest in Derrick Henry, but he's not my number one there.
Yeah, and as for Christian McCaffrey, still officially listed as questionable. Here is the latest update. It's really a non-update update, but McCaffrey missed practice Wednesday and Thursday. The last we heard from Matt Rule, the coach, he said he has a chance to play, and he's very hopeful about his availability. It tells me nothing. I just, as of right now, 50-50 coin flip. I don't know if McCaffrey's going to be in or if he's going to be out, but it's obviously something that's going to shape the slate in a pretty significant way if he's not able to play. Rebecca, are there any running backs that we have talked about, that we haven't talked about, I should say, that you think are players that are going to be key parts of the lineups you're building that you want to bring up here?
So like I said before about Breece Hall, because of that, what was he, 5,400? Yeah, that's just a price that like it always interests me when you have an RB1 at that price. So I think I'm going to, if I'm going like super wide receiver heavy, I think I'm going to include a little bit of that just because that price point is just so nice. Other than that, Dameon Pierce, but you guys have already mentioned that because that's still 5,600. So I'm either going, the maybe mix and match with one expensive one and one cheap one, or just doing two in that 6,000 range, I think would be that's how I think I am going to start building my lineups.
Yep, I think that totally makes sense. And we have hit on a lot of the most popular running backs, although, Neil, a couple that we haven't really mentioned yet. Austin Eckler, Josh Jacobs are expected to be two of the more popular running backs on the slate. At least per our projections, we do have Eckler as being one of the most negatively leveraged players at the position. And then while Josh Jacobs, we do have as being somewhat popular, still projects to be underowned in our sims, where we have him being kind of comparable to guys like Khalil Herbert and Jamal Williams while picking up less ownership. So any talking points for you when it comes to the other popular running backs like Eckler or Josh Jacobs?
I would say I'm probably going to be under the field on both. It's a really tough spot for Josh Jacobs against the Broncos. They've been a really good defense this year. So it's tough for me to really want to go to much Josh Jacobs. I'm not going to fade him. He obviously projects well. I'll have some, but I would expect that I'm going to be under the field on Josh Jacobs. And then Austin Eckler too. I mean, it's just because of the matchup is, fine. I guess actually the Texans are 30th in rush DVOA, so that accounts for the ownership. So the matchup is actually very solid for Austin Eckler. The Chargers do have a 25.25 implied team total, but they do so much of their damage through the air. I just don't know if I really want to go there. And I do have concerns about, is Justin Herbert healthy? Are they going to be able to move the ball like they usually do? I guess we'll find out this week. So the matchup is fine. The implied team total looks pretty good. I just, at the expected ownership that we have on us, Austin Eckler, he's certainly not a priority for me. Yeah, I think. And one other name that I meant to mention, Cordarrelle Patterson. I brought up that I like the matchup for Atlanta this week, and we talked about it with Marcus Mariota. With Myles Garrett out, Cleveland's defense could just be a mess. So I like Cordarrelle Patterson a little bit too at pretty low ownership.
Yeah, so we'll move on to the wide receivers. But first, I should shout out that sports betting coming to Ohio, and FanDuel is doing an offer right now where if you are looking to get in on sports betting and you pre-register to sign up over at FanDuel, you could register right now clicking on the link below. And then when sports betting goes live at the start of 2023, you are going to get $100 in your account over at FanDuel. So you haven't signed up at FanDuel yet, you live in Ohio, and I know this is a little bit specific of an ad read, but it's good value. Worth pointing out to anybody who's listening that's in the Ohio area. Click on the link below, and you're going to get $100 when you first open up that account at the start of the year. Let's move on to wide receivers now. And just a really broad question here to open up the wide receiver position. Rebecca, who's your favorite wide receiver play of the entire slate?
So it's hard not to say, of course, Stefon Diggs. I mean, I told you I really like Josh Allen this week. So he's going to be on a ton of my lineups. If I had to go with a second, I really like CeeDee Lamb, who I think maybe isn't someone that I would normally take, but just because of the amount of points that wide receiver ones are getting against Washington, it's just like too hard to ignore. So I really like CeeDee Lamb, Stephon Diggs, and Mike Williams is very interesting to me too. So I think we can expect another big game from him and a lot of points scored against Houston. So, but if I had to say my number one, it's going to be Diggs, just because Josh Allen Diggs, it's just easy.
Yeah, and I like the CeeDee Lamb mention as well, because I did have some concerns, well, as everybody did when Cooper Rush took over at quarterback for the Cowboys. He's been surprisingly not terrible during the time that he's been playing QB. And even going back to last year, the brief amount of time that he was on the field for the Cowboys, he's played reasonably well. And CeeDee Lamb is getting a ton of targets right now. So we saw that in the primetime game last week against the Giants, where CeeDee Lamb had one really bad drop early in the game, but it didn't prevent Cooper Rush from looking at him later on in the game. He ended up making the biggest play, the biggest catch of the game down in the later stages. And just, if we are going to be able to continue to get the kind of massive targets that CeeDee Lamb has seen, where last week, for instance, he ended up finishing with 12 targets. He's had 11 or more now in all 3 games to open the season. It's hard to not consider him a little bit underpriced just based on the workload. Neil, CeeDee Lamb in the mid-range, is he somebody you like getting behind? It's a lot of targets.
Yeah, I mean, the only concern with CeeDee Lamb is the projected ownership. We've got him at 15.2% ownership, but I think you're right. He's getting the targets. He's 6,700. The price is right. The ownership makes sense. People are going to want to go to CeeDee Lamb because he's a great wide receiver at a great price tag who's getting the target. So yeah, I like CeeDee Lamb. I'm probably willing to eat some of that chalk. I don't know if I'm going to be above the field at 15.2%, but it wouldn't surprise me. It's not something that I totally hate getting to. So yeah, I think CeeDee Lamb does make a lot of sense.
And then just broad question also, because there's so many wide receivers to talk about. But if you were building lineups right now, who do you think would be your most rostered wide receiver of any player on the slate?
Most rostered. Okay, now we're going a different question that I thought you were going to throw me in my favorite. But it's
the same. Same concept, right? Favorite.
It
like
is, it's kind of the same concept,
right? You're not going to get the most exposure to your least favorite wide receiver.
It's a slightly different question, but yeah, it is a similar concept. I really like DJ Moore. I mean, we talked about how much I like that game between Carolina and Arizona. I think the game has potential to go off. He's looking under-owned in the tools, so I'm glad that supports my perspective. 9.2% projected ownership. We have him optimal 13.9% of the time. He's 5,300. He's a great receiver against a bad pass defense. So I think DJ Moore makes a lot of sense. I don't know that he'll necessarily be my highest owned receiver because I like him in part relative to that ownership. I mean, Stephon Diggs could end up being my highest owned receiver. He looks like he has negative leverage at 8,400, but Stephon Diggs is a guy that I'm always willing to play if the lineup makes some sense. I kind of like both of these Pittsburgh receivers, which we didn't really talk about Mitch Trubisky when we were talking about quarterbacks, but looking at these receivers, it kind of makes me think, well, maybe Mitch Trubisky might make a little bit of sense. It's hard to say that with Mitch Trubisky, but in this matchup with all of the receivers looking pretty good, maybe I'll go to some Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool. Maybe I'll mix in some of George Pickens as well.
Yeah, Deontay Johnson, surprisingly, the player with the highest optimal percentage odds in our boom bust tool. So at least per our Sims, the player who is most likely to land the optimal lineup at wide receiver is Deontay Johnson this week. Although there's a value wide receiver that really stands out to me, and that's Richie James for the Giants, who I didn't think anything of this guy coming into the season, especially because it seemed like the Giants were going to have a lot of weapons at wide receiver. There was Sterling Sharp finally healthy, which only lasted a couple of games. Kenny Golladay, you thought maybe that he would play somewhat big of a role after the Giants signed such a big contract a couple of years ago, but he's basically not been able to get on the field. Kadarius Toney's been really banged up, and I love Toney. I think he's a really talented wide receiver. But as a result, Richie James has kind of just become the de facto go-to guy for Daniel Jones, and he's looked really good as a slot receiver. I think the targets are going to be there, especially now that Sterling Shepard is going to be out for the year with the knee injury. Rebecca, do you like Richie James this week, or is there a different wide receiver that you really like as a value option?
I do really like Richie James. So anybody who just shows me that they're from week to week, they are not getting a huge drop in targets. So when we were talking about Mike Williams, you see his targets just always going up, down, up, down. Seeing that Richie James is 6 targets, 5 targets, that to me is always makes my light bulb go off in my head whenever I see that. So at 4,000 on DK and consistent targets, I really like him.
Yeah, I mean, we've just kind of seen that workload from also somebody who I've been betting receiving props on because sportsbooks have been opening up Richie James over under 2.5 receptions the last couple of weeks. And it's just too low based on some of the workload he's been getting. Neil, going back to you, what do you like from a value standpoint at wideout this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, Richie James I think he's probably an obvious cash game play. I don't play cash, but I would think he's an obvious cash game play at 4,000 getting those targets, and certainly a smaller field GPP. But even in a large field GPP, he actually looks good in our tools. I don't know to what extent I'm going to get there. I don't think I'm going to be like jamming in Richie James, even though he looks great in our tools at 13% ownership. We've got him optimal 17.1% of the time. So he does look great. I don't know to what extent. If we're counting Romeo Dobbs as value, I think Romeo Dobbs, they've been saying, could be the wide receiver one for the Packers at this point. 4,500. We've got him at 5.1% projected ownership. Rebecca, do you have a response to that? I hear you laughing, and I know you're
She's wearing a
the Packers fan.
You literally always say the person I'm thinking of next. That like,
okay.
Romeo Dobbs is exactly who I would say next, because I had been waiting for him to go off. I knew it was going to happen, so I kept taking him. And then, 21 points last week on DK. That's not bad. And he's only 4,500. So the price has not gone up drastically where now he's out of contention for me. So Romeo Dobbs is someone I'm still interested in, of course.
Okay, good. I thought you were laughing at me for my Romeo Dobbs suggestion, so that makes me feel better.
Oh, definitely not. I was just buying my brother a Romeo Dobbs jersey last week. So.
They make Romeo Dobbs jerseys?
Yeah.
Devontae Adams definitely not in Green Bay anymore.
Right.
Neil, I want to ask you about the high end of the wide receiver position as well. I know that Rebecca said she likes Stephon Diggs, which is obviously something that a lot of people are going to get behind. A lot of people are rostering Stephon Diggs. He's going to be popular with the wide receiver position, and for good reason. He's been absurdly good to start the season. At the high end of the wideout spot, is Stephon Diggs going to be the guy for you, or is there a pivot option you really like to get off of him?
I mean, Devontae Adams is coming in at 12% ownership to Diggs is 22. So 10% ownership discount. I do like Devontae Adams always. AJ Brown looks pretty good. 11.9% projected ownership at 7,400. We have him optimal 13.5% of the time. Don't love the matchup with the Jaguars. I said earlier, I'm probably not going to a lot of Jalen Hurts. So I don't know to what extent I'll get there, but I do think that AJ Brown is kind of interesting. And Rebecca brought up Matt Ryan as an interesting quarterback option. I think that you have to then consider Michael Pittman as well. Looks pretty good in the tools. 7% projected ownership, optimal 9.3% of the time, even at his 7,200 price tag. Kind of interesting. And chat's been talking about Mike Williams, 4.8% projected ownership. He always has that ability to go off. So I think that Mike Williams is certainly in play as well.
Yeah, and also just looking at the wide receiver position, looking at some of our most positively leveraged wideouts right now, we do have Romeo Dobbs towards the top here, actually, as being the number one positively leveraged, most under-owned player that we have of the entire slate. So just wanted to add that into the Romeo Dobbs conversation as well. And then handful of other wide receivers, I should say, look really good, include a Treylon Burks, who's played a little bit bigger role for Tennessee as the season's gone on. Deontay Johnson, we mentioned DJ Moore, Noah Brown, another one who I think could potentially make for a good pivot off of the ownership going to CeeDee Lamb, or just even double stacks, lineups that might include both of them, and then maybe Cooper Rush as the quarterback, because there just haven't been that many targets going to a lot of different pass catchers for Dallas. It's been very centered right now around CeeDee Lamb and Noah Brown. So I don't think a double stack there is out of the question. Rebecca, any other wide receivers that you really like for the slate?
Yeah, I mean, oh God, if Pittman was just a little bit cheaper, that is just bugging me right now, because do you ever like see a wide receiver, you're just like, I want you so bad, but why are you 7,200? Why did your price go up so fast? So I like him, but I just wish he was a little bit cheaper. Otherwise, I'm all about Mike Williams, little trend he has going on. It's a good matchup. Plus, he is, if you follow his trend, he's more of the up down. I like where he's at, so I'd say that's one of my favorite plays. Yeah, I don't know, from around that price range, there's not really many other guys I'd be looking at. So, yeah, that's who I'm sticking with.
Yep, totally reasonable. And if you guys want access to all the tools we have over at Stokastic.com, and not just for NFL, but all the other sports as well. And for football, we've got the Boom Bust tool showing you the odds of each individual player to land the optimal lineup. And then, of course, player projections, ownership projections, top stack odds, all stuff that's invaluable to me when I'm building my lineups. You could sign up right now and use the promo code. I don't know why it's the promo code that's on the show, but whatever. This was in the run sheet. So we have college football. LBL is the one listed in here. That'll get you 50% off your first week. Mike, is there a different promo code that I should be using here? Oh, NFL strategy. All right. Nix that. Use the promo code NFL strategy. And that's the one that you want to use to get 50% off, because then we know that it came from this show. And that'll get you, once again, not just access for NFL, but also for MLB, and then also NBA starting up soon. We'll have all of that covered, and pretty much every other DFS sport as well. But let's move on now to the tight end position. And looking at the tight end spot, one thing that really stands out about this week is that we've got Travis Kelce in the primetime game. He is not going to be on the main slate, which does mean that we have much more limited options to look at when it comes to tight end. And as far as pay-ups go, we have a massive price gap between Mark Andrews and all of the other tight ends this weekend. So Andrews, by far the highest projected tight end on the slate, also the most expensive. Rebecca, you're going to be looking to spend up for him in your lineups at tight end?
No. Easy answer. No. And just like I said before, like when you have, all the black stacking up at the roulette table, you just assume it's going to hit the other one. You assume it's going to hit red. Andrews, 2 huge games in a row. I just assume it's going to go the other way. Again, I could be very wrong, but I'm just not willing to spend up if I'm going to be playing high stakes. If I were doing tournaments, like much more lineups, I would put him in a decent amount. But with the way I'm building, it's not going to be a go for me. I'm much more interested in cheaper options like Njoku this week. That's such a nice price at 3,700 on DK. So that's where I'm kind of sticking in that range. Tunyon, is always chance for going off. And if Andrews went off last week, I don't know. I think that Tunyon, maybe he has a decent week. But again, it's not going to be my biggest play. I really like Njoku at that price.
And then, Neil, I'm going to ask you also, just because I know a lot of people are going to be thinking about Mark Andrews and how to construct their lineups. He's the most popular tight end this week. In terms of our projections, he's projected for about double the DK points of any other player at the position. Over on FanDuel, he's projected for 15. The next highest projection on anybody else is Kyle Pitts at 9.5. So nobody's really remotely close to him in our projections. Pitts comes the closest, but there's still a pretty big gap. But there's also a gap in the price point where he's $8,400 over on FanDuel, $7,100 on DK. How much of a priority is paying up for Mark Andrews for you this weekend?
Yeah, so I like Mark Andrews a bit more than Rebecca does. I think the matchup, the Bills defense, obviously a solid defense, but they're missing several key pieces. And if I'm going to be playing Lamar Jackson at low ownership, a lot of the time I'm going to want to go to Mark Andrews as well. He looks fantastic in the boom bust tool, 15.7% ownership, optimal 21.8% of the time. He booms 22.6% of the time. So, it's not my favorite matchup in the world, even with missing pieces, but when there are pieces missing from a defense, you just don't know if the chemistry is going to be there. And at 7,100, I'm going to be taking some shots. So I do think that I like Mark Andrews quite a bit this week. I actually, can I go back, because I made a joke instead of finishing my my value play wide receivers.
Yeah,
so just throw a few at you. I'm in Detroit, missing Amon-Ra St. Brown, missing some of their key guys. DJ Chark looks like he is going to play. So I like DJ Chark at 5,000. Khalif Raymond also kind of interesting at 3,100 in a matchup with a pretty bad Seahawks defense. So I'm going to like those Detroit guys. You mentioned Treylon Burks, so I don't need to talk about him, but he looks great. And then also Robbie Anderson, a guy that I've talked about how much I like that matchup. Robbie Anderson is only 4,700, and I think he always has that boom week potential. So I think I'll be going to Robbie Anderson a bit as well. I just wanted to throw those names out there because I meant to get to them earlier and just interrupted myself.
Yeah, all good. No, that's all well and good. And then Rebecca, you said that you don't really like getting to Mark Andrews as much. You want to save money at the tight end position, which, totally reasonable stance as well. He's by far the most expensive player at the position. But if you're going to be going cheaper, is there one particular value option that you do think makes for the best one in smaller field tournaments?
Yeah. So, well, like I said, Njoku and Tunyon, they're about the same price. So Tunyon is 3,500 and Njoku is 3,700. That's a safe price to me. If I was going, super cheap, I would probably say Daniel Bellinger. Okay, so this is someone that I have never even thought about until this week, but looking at 2,800, I like people around that price because I mean that's when you see like Disley scoring touchdowns is when he's 2,800. To me, it seems a little bit like a lucky spot that might get a touchdown. And I mean, his targets went up, so that's an interesting play for me. There's not a lot else cheap wise that I've been targeting because I do just really like that low 3,000 price range. To me, it seems like the safe price range, but
Yeah. So, Neil, I'll ask you then, because if you're not because we're not going to be playing Mark Andrews in all of our lineups. Is there anything cheaper that really stands out to you? One thing we did hit on last week, we finally got a decent Kyle Pitts game. It took a while to get there, but he didn't suck last week. He's still relatively cheap this weekend, although the ownership has also come up because people have finally seen the talent lead to a at least decent fantasy game. I believe he hit the over on his receiving yards prop on the first series of the entire game. Whether it's Kyle Pitts or somebody else, is there somebody you like spending down for a tight end that you do think is a better value play than the other cheap tight ends?
Yeah, Kyle Pitts for sure is somebody I'm going to be going back to. I've talked about how much I like Mariota in this spot against Cleveland's defense without Myles Garrett. I think Kyle Pitts could benefit. I wish that they would just use him a little bit more than they do, but I think he's going to get there some of these weeks. He's going to have spike weeks, and at 5,000 in a great matchup, I'm certainly willing to go to Kyle Pitts at 9% projected ownership. Stephen Leibowitz called out in chat, Zach Ertz is going to look better if there is no Hollywood Brown this week, but even if Hollywood Brown is playing at 4,700, I like Zach Ertz in that matchup that I'm going to be targeting a lot. Projected for only 3.2% ownership. Zach Ertz obviously has some potential to have a spike week there. Gerald Everett looks phenomenal in our tools at only 5.2% projected ownership. He's optimal 8.9% of the time, so he looks great. TJ Hawkinson, I haven't gone to him a ton. He's only 4,100 though, and TJ Hawkinson obviously has that spike week potential. So at 4,100, I'll probably take some shots on TJ Hawkinson as well. Dalton Schultz, if he's only 3.6% ownership, I guess I'll have some Dalton Schultz shares. It's not my favorite play in the world, but obviously just at that low ownership, I'll be taking some shots. And then David Njoku, again, in that matchup, Cleveland and Atlanta, 3,700, project for 8.1% ownership, but he has that spike week potential. I'll probably go there a bit. I always like going to the Muth, so Pat Freiermuth is in play for me. Robert Tonyan, as Rebecca said, looks pretty interesting. I'm just like going down the list. All these guys, I'm probably going to be pretty spread out at tight end, I guess is what I'm saying. Tyler Conklin also has just gotten so many opportunities so far this year. Those opportunities might be going away somewhat with I forget who the number one Jets tight end appears to be coming back. Potentially they'll be splitting a little bit. So maybe Tyler Conklin loses some opportunity, but so far this year he has just been getting a lot of opportunities. So he might be interesting at 3,600 too.
Yeah, one more that I'm going to point out is TJ Hawkinson for me, somebody who's going to land in a lot of my lineups. I think if I was building lineups right now, the three that end up in my lineups the most would be Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, and TJ Hawkinson. Hawkins, just from a standpoint of where's the ball going for the Lions, right? No Amon-Ra St. Brown, no DeAndre Swift, who plays a really significant role in the passing game. And it just stands to reason that Hawkinson, as well as you had mentioned DJ Chark briefly before, just two players that I think should see an increased target share, and as such are just underpriced at the tight end spot on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So two players that I definitely think make sense at the position from that standpoint. Rebecca, anything else you want to bring up at the tight end position? If not, we could talk about our favorite stacks of the slate and wrap up.
Yeah, I would just say that on lineups that I'm not doing, Mike Williams, Gerald Everett is going to be probably in some of my lineups just because of those amazing targets. Like he had 10 targets in week 2, and then he had 6. So not seeing it go down too much, that is extremely appealing. So I would say that at 4,000, he's someone I'm going to be including a lot too. So just want to add that in. And Zach Ertz, I'll add in a little bit of that because there's insane targets there. So yeah, no, that's pretty much it for me for tight ends.
All right, so let's wrap up here with our favorite stack of the week. So if you were building one lineup and it was only one lineup that you could play in tournaments across the slates this weekend, what would be your stack and combination? Quarterback to wide receiver, could be a run back, however you want to interpret that. Starting with you, Rebecca, what is your favorite stack of the weekend?
Favorite stack, like I said, Josh Allen and Diggs. Just, I mean, favorite as in it's the safest. It's nice base to build around, especially because we have so many good value plays at other positions. So I'm liking the Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs. It sounds easy because it is easy. So that's going to be my number one.
Neil, I'll ask you the same question. If you were playing one lineup and had to build a stack in it, what would you be rostering?
I mean, I think that Lamar Jackson to Mark Andrews is the obvious one. So I'm actually going to go away from the obvious, and instead, I really like Kyler Murray this week. It's a little bit tough to say who to stack him with because we don't know if Hollywood Brown is going to be active. But if he is active, I think I'll actually pay up for Hollywood Brown at just really low ownership. Have some Kyler with Hollywood stacks. Maybe throw in Zach Ertz to those stacks. It's the hardest part of the stack is just we don't really know if Rondell Moore comes back, how much he eats into Greg Dortch this week. We don't know if Hollywood Brown is playing, so it's hard to know exactly who to stack Kyler with. But I think I'm going to be doing Kyler with if Hollywood Brown is active, I'll have Hollywood Brown in some of those stacks.
Give me Lamar Jackson to Mark Andrews. I mean, they've had such a good connection so far this year, and also Lamar Jackson just not having Hollywood Brown to throw to. We've seen more targets go to Mark Andrews, and at least as of now, Lamar Jackson's still not projected to pick up ownership. He's been the number one fantasy quarterback by a bit of a gap this year because of his rushing upside and also his success throwing the football. So I'm going to go Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews as long as that's continuing to not pick up ownership tomorrow. Field's been sleeping on that all year. Looks like that could continue. Guys, thank you very much for watching. If you haven't done it yet, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Enjoy all the games this weekend and good luck.